Do you ever find it difficult to extend grace to others? Welcome to the Parable Podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Zapchenk, and today I'd love to share with you one of my recent messages from our home church as we take a little summer break here at the Parable Podcast. Please enjoy this message wherever it may find you today. Well, this morning we are going to jump into the very short book of Titus. It's only 4 chapters. It's found in the New Testament. And Paul wrote this letter to his friend, and it was also his traveling companion, whose job was to restore order and truth to these starting out house churches in Crete and replace corrupt leaders with godly ones. Now, this Mediterranean island was a well-known haven for pirates, and it was steeped in Greek mythology as its foundation. So it was this bustling place with so many different ports, and it was infamous for sin and corruption. Now, the closest encounter that I'm sure all of us have ever had with a pirate is probably the ride at Disney, all right? That's pretty much it. So just imagine Jack Sparrow leading worship and Blackbeard preaching. That's what was happening in these house churches. So you kind of get the idea of where we're going. This was not going to be a beach vacation for Titus. He needed to lead by extending grace to others and not allow the junk to get to him, specifically for the people within these churches. Now, Titus was dealing with leaders and members who were just not being honest or neglecting to share the whole truth. So Paul's letter is specific to dealing with church leadership and holding on to the values of the Bible. But there's this passage that is on grace from Paul's writing that I believe will apply of how we can extend grace to others and not allow the junk to get to us. So even in the first chapter, one of the prophets of Crete called their people chronic liars, foul beasts, and lazy gluttons. Something to live up to, right? It's pretty harsh, but I'm sure you would agree those kinds of folks are the hardest to extend grace to. So I'm sure you can think of somebody who kind of pirates your time, your emotions, your space, and leaves your world in their wake. Before we extend grace, though, we need to understand what it is. Paul writes, "We have cause to celebrate because the grace of God has appeared, offering the gift of salvation to all people." Now, grace isn't just about being polite. It is the foundation of the Christian faith. We believe that we are rescued by faith through grace. So it's an undeserved favor. It's an undeserved gift from God for anyone who wants to accept it. And that grace doesn't stop there. Once we have a relationship with Jesus, God's grace now extends into all areas of our life so that we can walk as purely as we can and we go through our day to day. It's not about being perfect, because remember, He's the only one that is going to be perfect. It's in our brokenness that we are trying our best to live out His grace daily, and He is lovingly filling in the cracks. So of course, there is cause for celebration, but that grace, it's just for us, right? Well, no, we now need to extend it to other people. Well, that's kind of a bummer, all right? If I'm being honest, I don't want to show grace or mercy. It is challenging, it's annoying, it's frustrating. And personally, I really enjoy a plot line where there's vengeance or retribution, okay? And maybe there's some deeper work that I need to be doing in my life, but it's hard. Because we don't want to get hurt again, right? We don't want to be led to believe something we shouldn't. And it would be just easier to ghost them or simply ignore any damage that is being done. However, it is important for us to know that what can happen when we don't deal grace to the challenging people of our life, there's effects that are going to be present. There's going to take a toll if we choose that mindset of not giving grace. I'm sure you're familiar with the show Hoarders, all right? Maybe you even know somebody who struggles with letting things go, getting rid of things. And every episode I've watched that show, it just shows the sheer state of overwhelm of these people are just trying to fathom, how is this going to end up out of my house? And I believe the same thing happens to us. When we have this junk of our relationship or a situation is in our path, it starts as a minor distraction. And what do? We just bag it up, we shove it down, and we put it in the corner. But over time, that junk of our life can add up, and suddenly it's now surrounding us. A few things I notice can happen when we don't freely give grace away. The first is complete obstruction. When there is something in our way, we can't even see straight, right? Because it clutters our view. How my brain works is if there's things out on a certain place of our kitchen counter, I can deal with it for a couple of days. But after a while, I feel like it's in my brain. I can't even think straight. So I need my family or myself to just kind of move things out of the way so I'm not distracted. Things that we can remember, I'm sure, a time where there's another person that we care about that became an obstruction or a distraction and from our life, and it clutters our mind with the past conversations, broken promises, lies that are still rolling around up there. This mental game, it affects our work, it affects our joy and our passions, and it also obstructs our view with God. We're too busy figuring out how we're going to get through it. And we wonder, why can't I see him in this situation? Because there's such an obstruction. He desires us to extend grace to others in order to remove that obstruction so that we can see him fully. Secondly, by not extending grace, you are choosing to stay when you should be moving forward. This one is definitely on an emotional level for me. It's interesting how our minds easily forget the good, but that bad, it just is over and over on a loop in our minds. I have had a couple friendships in my life that were not healthy. Even years later, I would find myself kind of living in that same mindset that they forged within me. And our emotional wounds and traumas, they can cause us to stay still, to stay small, maybe to stay silent, negative, stay the same. The grace offered by God provides us with freedom to move forward in growth and not to be shackled by our emotions. It's taking that time for each one of us to process, to heal. We're not going to be able to advance in our lives when you're still ruminating on those thoughts from the past. God desires us to extend grace to others in order to move ahead for our emotional health. I know we all have material things that could have been thrown out, donated, released a long time ago. So finally, I need you to ask yourself, is there something that I need to let go? Is it time? My son Reed and I, we went fishing this week, and we didn't know what we were doing. We'd never been fishing. We had very low expectations. Our goal was to get one fish. And so, we just wanted to make some memories and have some fun. And so we ended up getting 16. All right. Now, it was a catch and release pond. Don't you guys get excited. I don't know if it was the location or the butter worms or whatever, but I was really proud of my first catch. Now, I don't want you to be too jealous. Here's my first one right here. There you go. Thank you for that. The area that we were at, like I said, it was a catch and release pond. And so I think that is so applicable of us letting go of the junk that we hold on to. It's an exercise of releasing that frees us up for even more. It can be as simple as when you feel overwhelmed or exhausted, you proverbially hold that thing, whatever it is, tightly in your hands. I do this in the car, I do this in my closet, I do it probably when I'm going to the bathroom, okay? You hold it tightly and you're just like, God, this is like the thing that's just bothering me, and I release that to God. Letting go of petty words, expectations, a relationship, it takes time. And sometimes it's maybe the same person or the same fish over and over again. God desires for us to extend grace to others so that we can let go for ourselves and release whatever or whomever to God. Now, if we don't move forward, or we push through that obstruction or let go, each one of us is going to deal with some of these things in very, very negative ways. So how do you know when it's time to extend grace to others? First, has it become all-consuming? Our bodies can fatigue, our stress levels rise, we live distracted and anxious, and maybe that feels like a normal day for you, but you don't have to live with that obstruction for the rest of your life. We've had multiple conversations, maybe this has been in a situation for you, multiple conversations and confrontations that result in nothing, and you feel like it is just the same cycle over and over. So maybe time today is to move forward. And third, remind yourself that it is not your job to fix them. Okay? You are able to give grace that has been freely given to you, and then you can let go of that responsibility you have not needed to carry. Verse 12 says this, grace arrives with its own instruction. Run away from anything that leads us away from God. Abandon the lusts and the passions of this world. Live life now in this age with awareness and self-control, doing the right thing and keeping yourselves holy. If you find yourself drifting away, I want you to take hold of grace, the grace that he provides for us. Utilize his awareness to discern what are the next steps that you need to take, and choose to draw him near as you walk through everything. Okay, so if we extend grace, that, Danielle, you're saying life is going to be good, right? No, I'm not saying that at all. We live in a world that is going to continue to throw punches. These feelings can definitely be triggered over and over again, but when the junk that pops up even after you extend grace, but here are some options from my perspective on how to not let it get to you. Does it work every time? No, but this is a building process, right? Number one, ask, is it worth it? This is the question I often ask to my children when they're having a fight. I'm like, is this worth fighting about? And I think the same thing goes for us. Is whatever happened worth holding on to anymore? Is it worth thinking about? Number two, setting boundaries. Now, I know some of these people that may be rolling around in your mind right now are your family or coworkers, and you just can't not see them anymore. But you can choose to decide how much access they have to your life. I want somebody to hear that today. You can choose how much access they can have to your life. If you want to create a boundary, it is your job to stick to it, not just for yourself, but also to benefit the other person. Number three is repeated prayer. Can we pray, God, teach me grace? This isn't a one and done. This is a constant refining of our souls. We ask God to teach us to have a posture to know and to extend grace in all areas of our life. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it by extending grace that it removes all the distraction or the problems in your life. But as we shift to his perspective, that junk, it seems to be less and less because we are drawing closer to him. The other theme that I took away from this book of Titus this week is once we have received his grace in our lives, now we can demonstrate that. We can demonstrate the transformation that's happening within each one of us. Without the grace of Jesus in our lives, we couldn't change or be holy on our own. And I love this note that was in my Bible. It said this, Paul also challenges Titus to live the truth he teaches. People are drawn toward God not through bold arguments, but by passionate godliness. We must be passionate about doing the right thing, and our actions, they tell the story. Our lives are living parables, shouting the mystery of God's godliness. I am sure we have met people who say, yeah, I know God, but their actions don't match up. I know I've been there too. That's me. My actions don't always measure up. It's because I fall into the trap of what our culture does, what my heart wants to. And you know where that's gotten me? Just more junk piling up in the corner of my life. God's intention for each one of us is to have our lives demonstrate a passionate devotion to Jesus. So much so that our lives extend grace. And then we want people to say, why are you doing that? What is your story? Why did you give grace away so freely? And then you can say, well, let me tell you about Jesus. Naturally, I am sure we can easily think of someone who falls into that pirate category for each one of us. But before we start listing names, I'd like for us to remember that each of us desperately needs the grace and redemption too. We are that pirate. God, our Savior, and his overpowering love and kindness for humankind entered our world. He came to save us. It's not that we earned it by doing good works or righteous deeds. He came because he is merciful. He brought us out of our old ways of living, and he made us completely new through the Holy Spirit. The good news of Jesus' grace is that it's powerful enough to change anyone and everything, no matter if they are a liar, they're a glutton, or they're a foul beast. That is the hope that we can cling to when life feels upside down. He knows all of the countless ways we have tried and strived to climb to grace by ourselves. But it's a free gift that allows him to extend grace so that we get to extend it to others and not allow that junk to overwhelm us. God, teach us the grace. Teach us to have a posture to know and extend grace with all of those in our life. We don't have to do it alone. God's grace is a gift that will be able to lift us up to keep following Jesus until the very end.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this message. If you love the Parable Podcast, please spread the word about it. If you want to show your support for the Parable Podcast, also just simply share it with a friend. This is an easy way for others to discover these amazing parable stories we feature each week. And here are 2 reflection questions from our time together today. Number 1, ask, is it worth it? Sometimes when we're going through something, it just seems so big, so large, and it probably is, but sometimes it is not worth holding on to anymore. So I'd love for you to journal through that. Number 2 is setting boundaries. This can be a real challenge, but I hope as you look at the certain parts of your life, realize, okay, here is a boundary I need to set with this person, and maybe just start small. It doesn't have to mean sectioning off your whole life from other people, but really focus in on what is the area that you need help in. That is it for today. I appreciate you spending your time with me. Remember, your parable serves as a reminder of God's grace extended to you. I'll see you next week for more on the Parable Podcast.